It is officially Marvel Avengers Endgame week. What is going on out there, guys? It's your boy Tommy on the spot. Thanks so much for checking us out on a very rare weeknight edition of Disney 101. Can you tell I'm a little excited? Today, we have a very exciting panel discussion that we're going to do to get you all set, all jazzed for all things Avengers Endgame, and we're going to talk about it. Of course, as always, I am joined by my co-host, Steve, down in Orlando, Florida. Steve, how are you doing today?
I feel like I have to say it now because you kind of put me on the spot the other day. You know me, magical as always.
That's right. Well, the other day I said that you normally come off as, and it wasn't on the screen, but I said, Steve, because I think I asked how you were, and you were like, I'm excellent, or something like that, instead of, you know me, magical as always. So
never with that much enthusiasm, though. Never.
I don't know that you've ever had that much enthusiasm. But we are honored today, and we're excited to also have another a third party here joining us for this discussion of all things Avengers Endgame. Joe Loftus, Marvel enthusiast. Joe is on the line with us. Joe, how are you doing today?
Fantastic, Tom. How you doing?
Oh, look at that. You've even
and I'm smiling.
What's that?
I said, and I'm smiling.
You are smiling, and you even have the big Thor hand going on there. Not Thor hand. Thanos hand. I apologize.
Good God.
Thanos hand going on there. And does that son of a gun light up?
Of course it does.
Let's see it. Oh, look
there you
at
go.
that. Oh, and it makes noise too.
Well, yeah.
Very cool. Are you going to be wearing that when? Now, first off, I guess let's talk about. Does everyone have tickets? Does everyone have their appointment of when they're going to be going and seeing the Avengers?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we unfortunately we had to wait until Saturday, but we were going like early, like late morning, early afternoon, and we got like the 4D IMAX tickets. So we're doing it all out.
Oh, that's awesome. That is very, very cool. And Joe, how about yourself?
Yeah. So we when I found out they were going live, I tried to get obviously opening night. But my wife worked late, so we wound up doing Sunday afternoon because a few of our friends all wanted to go together. So we're going to do the IMAX as well. But the thing that I'm just, unfortunately with social media and how that goes, everyone's spoiling it because tonight was the premiere, the early access premiere in California.
Well, and just so we will not do, I guess, any spoilers per se.
No spoilers
on the show. Yeah, because I know a lot of us have definitely obviously don't want it spoiled for us. So I'm hoping you don't already have it.
Oh no,
Joe, I thought you were really going to be like, yeah, it sucks. We just found everything out. This is going to happen. This is
basically, no. No, but I think that's the struggle right now is avoiding those pitfalls. Social media, I feel like every time I go on, I'm like, peeking through my hand to make sure that I don't see any spoilers for the movie.
Well, and the worst part is, fighter Colby Covington is known for being like the first guy. He's an MMA fighter for UFC. He's known for being like the first guy to see all of these movies and getting all the early access and then just tweeting every major spoiler of every Marvel movie, every Star Wars movie. So you're right. It's very, very scary to go on to social media and you don't want to see anything. And it's Mom. At least you guys have direct plans to see it. I'll probably see it this weekend. But I too am hoping to go and do an IMAX deal and everything.
Do you have tickets already, or?
We do not have tickets, but the theater by our house is like playing it every hour, literally from 6 a.m. to 3 a.m. So I think we'll be okay. I did try to look at that up, but again, I don't know necessarily that my wife will want to go at 3 o'clock in the morning to go see the show.
Well, you heard about the guy that got early access and I guess video recorded some of it and then posted it online. And like he had a ton of followers on Twitter and it was like major plot points. And like it's out there. I mean, if people want to go out there and find the whole synopsis of the movie. But yeah, basically he ruined it for so many people. And like even Robert Downey Jr. Was quoted as saying like the last 8 minutes of the movie are apparently the best in the entire MCU, which like, think like quotes like that. I'm like, all right, I definitely, this is one of the first Marvel movies that I haven't gone into detail about theories and, looking at every single trailer. I think I've only seen the original trailer, maybe one or two others that have popped up on like ads and stuff, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and what in the Disney world over in the live chat writes, can't wait for this, midnight tickets for a double bill in IMAX, which is awesome, and I'm very jealous. I'd love to do that, and good for you being able to go ahead and get those tickets. So I guess, thinking about this now, this is a 11-year basically climax with all this coming to an end and ahead here. I guess what are some of your let's start with what are some of your favorite movies in the MCU overall thus far? I guess we'll start with you, Steve.
Oh, that's a good one. Off the top of my head, I have to go with Captain America: Civil War. It was just, I really like Captain America just as a hero anyway, and it brought together, a lot of different storylines and all that stuff. And it was kind of, I feel like it was the stepping stone into all of this stuff. We've been leading up to it really, but I think that's really when it started to ramp things up with the introduction of Black Panther and Spider-Man and all that. So off the top of my head, I think I have to go with that one.
Yeah, so that's a great one. What about you, Joe?
I would probably still say Captain America: Winter Soldier, mainly because out of the trilogy, the first one being the weakest, Winter Soldier kind of changed my mind about that character as a whole, and now that he's such a staple of the MCU, that kind of made me have a little bit more faith in the direction that the entire MCU was going. Whereas Iron Man 2 was a struggle to get through. Like a lot of sequels were being disappointments. And my fear was that you were going to have a lot of these setups where the originals were great, even Guardians of the Galaxy, and then the sequels were never living up to that hype. Whereas, they only improved upon the, on the first one with Winter Soldier.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know that a lot of people think the first Captain America wasn't the best, but I will say that for me was really, it was either that or actually the Edward Norton Incredible Hulk that got me started on the idea of the after credit scene. When Ed Norton's I think it's Ed Norton's in the bar, I want to say, and Iron Man approaches him.
Well, not Ed Norton, it's Thunderbolt Ross is in the bar.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, and but that wasn't the first after credit scene. Iron Man was.
No, Iron Man was, but then I feel like the best after credit scene wasn't that when Captain America wakes up and realizes it's present day.
No, that's in the first Captain America movie.
Yeah,
that's in the regular movie.
Yeah.
Oh, for me,
it's not even like a post credit scene or anything. It's part of the movie.
Listen to Thor's arm, okay? that was in the.
What in the Disney world agrees Winter Soldier: Civil War. For him, and I will say the last Avengers I thought was the most epic movie they've ever done in the whole MCU. I felt like that was a major event. Everyone in the theater seemed to, whenever each character was introduced, everyone went nuts for it. When Black Panther was introduced, everyone went insane. When the Guardians showed up, people were going nuts. And I've said this always, one of my favorite things about this entire deal is when the superheroes don't win. And for me, leaving that theater oh my God, what just happened? The superheroes were in peril is something that I think is something that I'm really looking forward to, and I really enjoyed kind of wrapping things up with the last movie.
See, that was one of my frustrations with Infinity War, though, where you had the dusting, right? Where a lot of those characters, I personally felt that there was no emotional stake in the sense that, okay, perfect example, Black Panther and Spider-Man, right? Were dusted. They're coming back though, obviously, right, because they have contracts for the movies down the line. So I feel like they had to pick characters to die that had the impact, but I felt they didn't choose the right ones that they could have, because certain characters, going into Endgame, you're like, oh, I'm not really sure if they're coming back. But a significant amount of them that did get dusted, are coming back because of announced movies that are, and you're supposed to kind of go in with this, I guess a little bit of ignorance and, again, being a bah humbug, I'm more like, I would have preferred it to be different characters as opposed to like just all the main characters. But I see what you're saying though. Like for them to go in there and not come out shining, I thought was a nice take on it.
Yeah, well, and it's actually funny. I just got done on the way home from work here listening to an interview with Dave Bautista, who's obviously, he plays Drax the Destroyer. And he was saying that when they filmed the first two movies, they didn't tell them what was going to happen. They filmed them, a lot of it together. They didn't tell them when the first movie was going to end. So he was running around during the promotion of the first movie being like, oh yeah, I'm actually in both of the next one. And then obviously the finale as well, not realizing that the movie ends with the dusting. And they didn't tell any of the actors like when it was going to end. So he was like, I kind of let the cat out of the bag a bit, not realizing what had happened. And I think that by saying, Black Panther will return or this person will return, it has really kind of, it lets you know that, hey, a lot of these characters that were dusted at the end of each movie, at the end of the movie there, are eventually going to be returning, which of course is a good transition now into where do we think this is all going? What in the Disney World there in live chat said, have we talked about Tony Stark left arm theories yet?
Tony Stark?
Tony Stark. I know.
Tom, you're killing me. All right,
I said Tony Stark.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm glad you brought up the left arm theory because that was one of the things I was going to talk about. So basically, if you were to follow a lot of the majority of movies that Robert Downey Jr. is in, there's been this underlying injury with his left arm. So it actually, you mentioned Civil War, Steve. That's a perfect example. It continues to get injured. He has it in a sling at one point. It gets crushed by a car during the airport battle. In Iron Man 2, he gets hit with like debris. Like there's a whole bunch of moments where his left arm keeps getting like injured and he's always nursing it. And it's actually one of the few like continuity that I see in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that I appreciate because obviously the Infinity Gauntlet worn on the left hand. So it was kind of like people are saying it's the Russo's brothers' subtle nod that Tony Stark is going to be the one using the gauntlet, and in my opinion, ultimately sacrificing himself.
I could see that. I mean, it's hard to not take it as like a meta approach to it because we know that for all intents and purposes, this is his last movie in the Marvel MCU. We know that it's going to be Chris Evans probably his last movie too, and a few other people. So it's definitely worth thinking that it could be one of those guys, particularly considering they're the front runners of this whole thing anyway. So I think that's definitely worth. I had never heard of that before actually, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's really good stuff there, Joe. And I guess what do you have any other theories as well of how they bring all these characters back, and who comes back? So
the running, I mean, it's pretty much all but proven that time travel is going to be a significant part in this movie, where they're initially going to go fight Thanos on the farm planet, whatever that might be, lose, and then kind of regroup and go back in time,
right.
Using Ant-Man technology, right? So at that point, there is where it gets a little hazy because, I mean, you could go down a lot of different paths where are they going into the multiverse where they're going into another universe where the Infinity Stones haven't been collected yet? Are they going into the same universe and taking them away from Thanos before he ever collects them? So he can't actually do the snap, undoing everything. But again, if they do that route, it kind of takes away any emotional importance that that Infinity War had, right? Because if you're just going to undo everything, it's like, oh, okay, well, what was the point of that then? So that's why I think if they are going to undo it, they should undo certain things, not everything. They shouldn't bring back everybody. Again, obviously, they're going to bring back certain characters, but I think in order for this movie to really have a lasting stay, and this is supposed to close the book on the Infinity Saga, there has to be some emotional stake. There has to be some, importance to it. So I hope they go a route that does that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and particularly just because we kind of alluded to this while we were doing the Star Wars episode too. Joe, I don't know if you're a Game of Thrones fan at all, but we're having a very similar few moments here, couple of weeks here with Game of Thrones, where, it's going to be who is going to actually come out on top? How are they going to do it? Who's going to be left standing at the end too? Because, with Game of Thrones, we know a few people are going to die. We don't know who, but, and it's probably going to be a similar thing with Endgame, where we know there are absolutely some people that are going to survive based on contracts and stuff, which is kind of hard not to, say, oh yeah, we know Spider-Man lives, we know Black Panther lives, but you're kind of watching for that emotional payoff and more for that like passing of the torch moment.
Absolutely. And actually, our friends over in the live chat, What in the Disney World, has a really interesting theory. They said, what about a post-Endgame Ultron return? An Ultron head was found in the Spider-Man Homecoming when he's stuck in the vault place. What do you guys think about that?
Well, there was a kind of a theory going around with one of the trailers that was released that one of the voices sound like an altered version of Vision, where it was actually Vision and Ultron merged into one being. And, so more of like, I guess like a Deadpool character where like, it not necessarily all good, not necessarily all bad. But what they're thinking is that by going back, it's going to affect different timelines, right? So if you think of every Avengers movie as a chapter, right, of the book, they're going back a few chapters, and each time they're changing little parts of that particular chapter, it's affecting the whole story. So that would mean that Avengers 2 Age of Ultron is going to be impacted, which could mean that maybe Ultron does survive. Maybe he's able to, whatever it might be. The same thing with Loki. If they go back to Avengers 1, is Loki now going to be able to survive because they affected that somehow, and then again, the same thing with Infinity War. So I think it's definitely possible.
Yeah, I mean, and especially with Loki, if you go all the way back to the first Avengers and change his timeline, that's undoing a lot of character growth. That's undoing a lot of, him nudging towards good, that is automatically undone. And, we kind of, again, know that there's going to be a Loki standalone spinoff on the Disney Plus thing. So, that's another thing where we don't know when that series is going to take place. But if it takes place post Endgame, there could be so many different ways to go with it. And I think that's a lot of it. There are so many different theories that have a lot of loose ends, but even within those theories, there's so many different avenues that could be pursued. And based on what actually happens, will create this ripple effect, into the next phase.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I will say something I'm looking for, and I feel like it's going to happen in one way or the other. One thing could be, I think a swerve from left field no one's seeing and nobody's thinking about is coming. Maybe it's something where Chris Evans really isn't wrapping up. Maybe he's coming back for another movie. Maybe there really won't be another Spider-Man. Maybe that entire deal of saying there's going to be another Spider-Man movie and doing that whole coming attractions and everything to that extent is all just kind of a ruse, so to speak, to get people to think, oh, Spider-Man has to be returning, and then he never does.
Tom, maybe we fake the moon landing too.
What's that?
Maybe we fake the moon landing too.
Well, hey, conspiracy theories.
I mean, I would love that. I would love for that to actually happen. But Tom Holland being the, the person that's willing to spill the beans at the drop of a hat,
Jake
I don't think you could be able to hold on to that secret. Yeah. Unless they're fooling him too.
Yeah, which would be hilarious. But Steve, you brought up a good point that I wanted to ask you guys is. Especially now that they're closing like what I also like to consider like the Earth saga, right? Because so far a lot of this stuff, for the majority of the movies anyway, besides like maybe Guardians and Captain Marvel, have been happening somehow involving Earth, right? And now after Endgame, it's going to most likely move more outward, right? Outside our galaxy. And because of that, and they're going to be getting into much weirder, like, trippy stuff in the comics, maybe more of the lesser known parts of the comics, right? Is the superhero movie, right? The Marvel Cinematic Universe, is that doomed to repeat what happened to like the spaghetti Western? Like back in the day, spaghetti Westerns they would be a new one every year. Clint Eastwood would come out with a new one every other year. And no matter how many came out for, 20 years, they ruled the movies. and until eventually they flooded the market, and they kind of just plummeted in popularity, and that's it. They're gone now. Do you think that's going to happen to this as well?
I don't want to say that this is too big to fail, but it could be a Titanic thing. I just think that this whole superheroes and nerd culture and nerddom and all of this stuff, it's not just superheroes, but I mean, Game of Thrones is at its core a fantasy TV show that is swords and sorcery and stuff, and with D&D exploding as it is, and all this other nerdy culture stuff, just absolutely, it is completely everywhere right now. I don't think that people can necessarily get oversaturated with it, and I think that there are so many different kinds of superhero movies, as we've kind of seen. You can have the super campy, ridiculous superhero movies that like Guardians of the Galaxy is, and you can have the ones that have a lot of gravitas, and like the Captain America and even Captain Marvel to an extent, where it's more story driven as opposed to just, hey, we're out in space doing all this crazy stuff. So I think that with this kind of post Endgame situation happening, I think they might even be a little bit more free to explore all the different things, because all of the past 11 years and the 22 movies and all this stuff has been leading up to this movie, and now that we're after this, they're kind of saying, okay, we're done with this, and they're either going to set up another 11-year arc, or they're just going to say, okay, now, it's going to be loosely connected, almost like the TV shows and, like all of the expanded stuff is, but more, just, individual, and they're all going to go and spread out and do their own thing.
Well, that's what,
funny you say that, because over in the live chat, Key Rocker Plays said, do you think adding the multiverse into the MCU is a good idea so they can do a secret invasion arc for the next Avengers crossover, which kind of ties into what we're saying?
I mean, the Secret Invasion, they did have talks about that, but they said most likely the next Avengers movie isn't going to be for another 5 years. Yeah, they're going to, after Endgame, they're taking a hiatus. Obviously, with, Far From Home is probably going to be the last one for a little bit anyway. I mean, they possibly could, but again, that brings up the point of if you're introducing the multiverse, which, I mean, at that point, you could be bringing in a lot, which is good. Don't get me wrong, and of course, obviously, with them purchasing Fox, you have X-Men coming back into the fold. That definitely could be a huge asset. But with a lot of the Marvel Netflix originals being canceled, and some of them for random reasons, some of them for not doing very well, I guess for me, I just kind of see that as blood in the water, where like now, that might start to happen with other movies. I mean, again, I'm just being pessimistic, but I'm more or less bringing it up to see what you guys think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I feel like it's almost too big to fail, but I also think maybe at some point people do get a little like, all right, enough's enough at some point. How many times can we go back to the well? But I think, by being able to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, and to put more an emphasis on some of the other types of characters, continuing to maybe see what Captain Marvel has to offer down the road, because I thought she was a really revolutionary character in the way that they portrayed her in her movie, I think could allow this to continue on for many years to come.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I don't necessarily think that, this well is going to dry up anytime soon. There are how many different years of stories that we have with Marvel, and especially like Joe keeps saying, if they do end up expanding into the multiverse, you can pursue all of the different. There's a universe where Falcon ends up taking over the mantle for Captain America, and I think Bucky does too at some point. And there's a female Thor now, and there's so many different things that they could do where they're just going to keep churning these out, and hopefully they will, now that they kind of have this and they've said, okay, we have our gold medal, we have our this is our diamond ring right here in Endgame, and now we can kind of just go and do some of that more exploratory stuff.
Well, yeah. I know that the Russo brothers, were on the fence about continuing, especially now after Endgame, because this is kind of like their baby. And the Marvel recipe works, obviously, as we know. I mean, they pretty much can't make anything that's bad. But it kind of brings that age-old question: just because you should you? Or just because you
Yeah,
can,
just because you can doesn't mean you should.
yeah, exactly. Because my worry with that is like everyone has become so attached to Robert Downey Jr., right, or Chris Evans. Now, mind you, Chris Hemsworth has already. I don't know if you guys heard that recent news, but they already announced Thor 4.
Right.
So he's going to be, yeah, he's gonna stay on, which makes sense because he's not really doing anything else. Chris Evans wants to go to directing, which again, that's fine. Robert Downey Jr. Wants to move on to different projects. I get that. And a lot of it I think is going to be more cameos because Marvel just can't afford these guys anymore. And I do think that they have a strong, stable base with Tom Holland. And the actor escapes my name who plays T'Challa. But
Chadwick Boseman,
yeah. They want him to actually take over the Avengers going forward. Actually, that he would become almost like the new Captain America. I don't know if he has that. Like, there's definitely a fan base there. I don't know if people are as on board with him as they were with Chris Evans. I guess time will tell. But I'm just curious to see how they're going to do it because I think people love new Marvel movies, but they don't like change, if that makes sense. Like seeing new people in old familiar, you know what I mean? Like it's the same fan base that are going to these movies. You know what I mean? So all of a sudden, someone who 10 years ago was going to see the first Iron Man 11 years ago. Now all of a sudden there's a different person playing Iron Man. Like, I don't know. I mean, will I go see it? Maybe, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I mean, got me in for Spider-Man, and I was done. I was like, "What's the?"
Yeah, man, 3 Spider-Mans. I was just like, I can't do this anymore. Now, don't get me wrong; they proved me wrong, right? Because Tom Holland's an amazing Spider-Man,
right?
So who knows? Again, Marvel definitely can prove you wrong for sure. They really do a good job at kind of weeding out the right people for the role.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, I think even to go as far as like Into the Spider-Verse even proved that you can still have a Spider-Man movie that you can kind of it's a very similar formula, but at the same time, it's telling a completely different story. So, and I think that's what the Spider-Man is doing, where the whole thing with Andrew Garfield was they were telling almost the same exact story that the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man was telling. So it was definitely a more, classic by the books reboot. Whereas with this Spider-Man, it's a little bit different because they're keeping him in high school. They're keeping him, kind of young and, a little bit less, street savvy, I guess. So
yeah, Andrew Garfield was just horrific in that role.
Oh, no.
Sorry.
Tell us how you really feel.
Tom Holland is I don't know. I agree with you, Steve. I think that the vulnerability, like that scene between him and Robert Downey Jr. was amazing, and that actually wasn't their original scene. It wasn't scripted. They basically just said, "All right, guys, you guys are gonna say goodbye to each other now," and they just kept the cameras rolling, and they let him specifically have a little bit more time than any other person who was dusted, and I thought that was cool.
Yeah, and I like the excuse that they used on why it took longer than anybody else, as because it was his spidey sense.
Yeah, I know, right?
And they were like, no, he knows something is coming way before everybody else does because of his spidey sense. I'm like, fine, I can deal with that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I think, that has become synonymous with kind of all the Marvel movies, and I think that is really crucial for this particular movie, is that after credit scene. Where do they go from here after all is said and done? And I think, usually there's 2. Usually there's one after credit scene that continues the story, or there's one after credit scene and one after credit scene that's like kind of silly and funny.
Yeah.
Do you think there's going to be something that continues and shows where we're going next? Or do you feel like it's just going to be something silly and funny as they all take a bow out?
I think it's, that's a tough question because, they definitely could go the route of, what is the next major villain, right? Are they going to go the X-Men route? Are they going to bring in Galactus? Like something that's even more incredible, right, than someone wielding an Infinity Gauntlet, which again I think is tough to do. Like they really have a lot, to kind of put out there that would make the audience go, oh crap, if we thought we had it tough this time, we barely survived. How are they going to manage this time? I don't know. And this is where I think more likely they're going to go, is they're going to drop an X-Men post-credit scene that will introduce them. Yeah. And then that way that'll hold people over until all that merger is official and they release their first movie.
So I think that there's definitely going to be that the mid-credit scene is usually the one that's setting up, something in the future. So I think if maybe the X-Men is going to, I think that would be an amazing thing. I was also thinking of, something along those lines where it's something from this merger where they're going to maybe or maybe even Fantastic Four, maybe even, something down the line. But I would love for the actual end credits after everything is done, the smoke, clears and everything like that, for it to just be Deadpool running up to wherever the last battle takes place, wherever the last thing happens, him just running up after everybody is already gone, like ready for battle, and it's like, I'm here, guys, and just looks around and goes, and cut.
That's good. I like it. So I guess here, as we are mowing down here, I guess the big thing we all need to kind of discuss here is, what are our predictions of where this ends up here? Do we think Thanos eventually gets knocked off his perch? Do we think Thanos comes out of this victorious? Key Rocker Plays over in the live chat said he really wants Stark to be the one to kill Thanos. What do you guys think? How do you think this is all going to wrap up?
Well, I mean, we obviously know that Thanos is going down. That has to happen.
Right.
I think it's going to be a combination of all of them. I do think that Stark is going to have the final blow, just because, I love that quote when he confronts him on Titan, and he calls him by name, and then, Iron Man says, "You know me," and he says that, you're not the only one cursed with knowledge. I think that they're going to have kind of that final standoff, and that's why I believe so strongly that Iron Man will be utilizing the Infinity Stones in some capacity. I don't know how yet. I think he will be the one to kind of finish him off, but it will be a joint effort for sure.
Oh yeah, and I think, just because of the fact that Iron Man was the one that started it, it was the first movie that kicked all of this off. So I think it's fitting that he would be the one to end this particular segment of, this arc. So I think that's very fitting, and I think that it's going to definitely come down with maybe him and or Captain America giving that ultimate sacrifice and laying down their lives so that everybody else can survive. Maybe in some sort of trade, thing, and maybe they're going to be like, hey, we're going to make a deal with you, Thanos, like we're going to die so that everybody else can come back to life and live. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you figure Iron Man needs to be involved in it. He is kind of the start of this whole deal. Of course, I've always thought that they kind of told you what was going to happen in the first Guardians movie, and that Drax was going to find a way to kill Thanos. Because he made it very clear that he's going to kill Thanos, that he wanted to kill Thanos. It would kind of be a smidge anticlimactic, I guess. But I would love to see that.
I mean, he's done damage to him before in the comics. Nebula's, destroyed him. Like there's a lot of different ways they can go in it. But again, unfortunately, this isn't the comics, and they're going off of, and also Robert Downey Jr. was the only actor in the entire, besides the directors, obviously, that saw the entire script. And all the other actors weren't given the entire script. So that kind of says a lot too. Obviously, he's going to be important from beginning to end. So take that with a grain of salt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, any last minute thoughts here that you guys have? Anything you're specifically excited about? I guess what the legacy of this series is going to be? Because in my opinion, a 22 film series, when this is all said and done, is probably the greatest, collection of films ever made.
Yeah, and I mean, there were a couple of misses, a couple of those sequels, like Joe mentioned, that were, if it were any other movie, probably would have been okay. But when you take it into this entire collection, like there are a couple of weak spots. But yeah, overall, you can't really come up with any other, franchise that has had this staying power and this much, just everything about it is just, even Star Wars, you can take it with just the 3 movies and the legacy that it left. But when you take the overall, with the prequels that, everybody has their own opinion on, and even the new movies that, definitely are controversial in a couple of different ways, this is one thing that is just the legacy that this Marvel, this, set of time has left, has just been phenomenal.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that they do something where, like, so I have the MCU Phase 1 box set, right? And then I know also that they have the Phase 2 box set. I'm hoping that, and again, this seems very unlikely, but that they do an entire Infinity War Saga box set. I doubt they will, just because it would be so expensive, but man, that would be a great collector's item.
Really would.
Yeah, I mean, they might do just an Avengers thing, with the 4 movies, and then just go really all out on the 4 movies. But
maybe, yeah, maybe. But to have 22 movies, it would be $1,000. I mean, like, it would
easily. Yeah. Not to mention any collector, appeal to it. Just the movies alone.
Yeah. So, but no, definitely excited, and just keeping in mind everybody who's on the chat, no spoiling. That's got to be the number one thing.
Please.
Going.
Anyone who's in the chat, anyone who follows us on Instagram or Twitter, let's avoid the spoilers. Don't ruin it for anyone else too who might be tuning in and doing that. I mean, I'll probably quickly catch it and delete it, so it's not even going to be there for very long. If anyone does it, it'll just make me kind of bummed. But at the same time, definitely try to avoid the spoilers, and hopefully we can reconnect maybe same time next week and talk about how it all went down and what we all thought.
And if the chat would like Joe Loftus, Marvel enthusiast, to continue to stay on as a regular guest, please say so in the comments.
That's right. Absolutely. Yes. Please let us know. But Joe, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we'll be able to have you join again next week when we talk about how it all went down. And I thought that you gave us some great feedback, and definitely got me much more excited for both of you guys. I mean, let's be honest, I'm more or less a glorified Disney Brian Seacrest here. So with you guys, it's definitely good to have both of you guys there.
All right, anytime.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. You guys can go ahead and subscribe to Disney 101 here on YouTube. Follow us over on Twitter and Instagram at Disney 101 Pod. We just launched a vlog series that we're going to do every Monday with a brand new vlog each week from the Disney parks. And thanks so much for everyone who joined us in the live chat and watched along with us live. We'll be back next week. We'll be back throughout the week with a variety of shows going on, but we'll be back next week specifically with our Avengers kind of review and talk about everything the way it went down. But until then, everyone, enjoy Avengers Endgame, and we will talk to you guys real soon after a little bit.